further ado, I'm going to share a little bit of some of the background about what we think is important and vital as a part of the story of religion, religious freedom, and the founding of the nation in Philadelphia. And I want to draw attention to this as well, that this project is made possible with funding from the Philadelphia Funders Collaborative for the Semiquincentennial. And we are with the Dialogue Institute based at Temple University. We also have an academic journal, the Journal of Ecumenical Studies. So, wanted to share with you a little bit about what brought us together in thinking about K through 12 teachers. Dr. Abdullah and I, about a couple of years ago, applied for a National Endowment for the Humanities grant to develop a summer teaching institute on the theme of the city of brotherly love, religious diversity, freedom, and the founding of the nation in Philadelphia. We were so excited putting this together. We developed, we got speakers, got locations, got everything all laid out, sent out our acceptance letters on April 2nd. And then that same day, we received a letter from a Doge office saying that these grants had been terminated. So we are one of many NEH grants that were terminated. It was very frustrating. It was very disappointing. And I know it was disappointing to many of you. Some of you actually applied to be a part of that institute. But we decided we were going to make lemonade out of lemons and pivot to working with some private funders. And we felt like, given the response that we had around this project, we knew that K through 12 teachers needed something, and we really felt like we wanted to offer it. So this is a way that we were able to pivot tonight. So a couple of the programs that we do is we have a long program offering religion and history tours to the general public. And this is what we're positioning ourselves for as an organization. We want to tell the stories of religious diversity and how it relates to the founding of the U.S. And so we have a tours program, and we welcome K through 12 educators to book a tour with us. And we can have guides who are specialists at working with middle school and high school students and offering tours as a way to augment your education in your school settings. Another project that we have working on is a tour app. With funding from the National Endowment for Humanities previously, we started research on developing a digital platform to talk about these stories. We hope to release this app in January and offer it as a resource for Philadelphia educators next year. We also have a program to develop training for tour guides. And part of this training curriculum has a lot of in-depth knowledge and resources about this topic. And we're going to try to find a way to make this curriculum accessible to K through 12 educators like yourselves as a potential resource next year. So Philadelphia, the Semiquincentennial, next year, millions of visitors are expected to come to our wonderful city. And we have to ask the questions as Philadelphians: how will we tell the story of Philadelphia? So I have a question for you as we begin. On a typical history tour of colonial or revolutionary Philadelphia, what are the typical people, places, and themes that come up from your experience or what you have heard? Just drop a few in the chat and let's see what emerges from the conversation. Any key figures or places that typically will come up on a tour when we're heading out? Surely some of you have been on history tours of Philadelphia at some point. Independence Hall, of course. Founding Fathers. Declaration House, where Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. What else we got? Ben Franklin. Those involved with writing and formatting the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Okay, great. So one of the other topics, I mean, typically when people talk about Philadelphia, they talk about Philadelphia as the birthplace of American democracy, which that's true because of all the things that you just mentioned. But we think it's also important to talk about Philadelphia as kind of a birthplace of religious freedom. As a part of this bigger, larger story. And that's the type of story that we want to talk about in next year for the Semiquincentennial. So integrating that role of religion into that founding history. So religious diversity in those early colonies. Every colony had a kind of a different approach to religion. If you went to a place like Massachusetts, this was a place that had an established religion. There was one official congregational church that was the established religion of the colony. That meant that whether or not you wanted to go to church, or whether or not you were a congregationalist or not, you had to pay taxes to fund the building of a congregational church and to fund their clergy. Massachusetts was also a location where if you were a part of a religious minority, you were either not welcome or you were violently dealt with. Like this woman here, Mary Dyer, the Quaker, who refused to follow the dictates of the church and followed her own conscience as a Quaker, and she was hung in the Boston Common. So yes, there are many stories of religious intolerance in American history that sometimes we're not aware of. But the Philadelphia colony, the Pennsylvania colony, was a little bit different. William Penn founded a colony as a member of a religious community, of a religious minority that had been persecuted. William Penn, as a religious dissident within England, even though he was baptized as an Anglican, his parents wanted him to continue to be an Anglican. He went off to college and converted to this subversive faith, a faith that believed that the divine light of Christ was in all people, a faith that believed in nonviolence, a faith that believed in challenging traditional social hierarchies of authority. And this was the guy who founded the colony of Pennsylvania. So when he arrived, he brought this document called the Penn's Frame of Government, and he had this radical notion. Penn asserted that all in this colony, all who confess and acknowledge the one almighty and eternal God, and who are willing to live peaceably and justly in a civil society, if you do those things, you won't be bothered or prejudiced for your religious persuasion or practice in matters of faith and worship, and nobody would force you to attend church. So again, this Penn's colony was different from other colonies. You'll notice some of these words here. You did have to acknowledge God. You did have to follow certain rules, but nonetheless, there was a wider freedom of religion here than in other colonies of the day, putting this historical character in that context. So in Penn's colony, with no established official religion, there came along all kinds of other religious groups. Now, in the chat, can you name as many of the religious groups that you think showed up during that colonial period? Just drop as many as you can, as fast as you can in the chat. Mennonites, yes, of course. Germantown Mennonite Church is the oldest Mennonite church in North America. Catholics, of course. We'll talk about that in a minute. What other groups? Jews, yes. Anabaptists. Mennonites, of course, are part of the Anabaptist tradition. Deists, yes. Muslims, yes. A lot of people are not aware of that, but Muslims were here during the colonial period as well. A couple of other ones. How about some of those obscure Protestant sects? Yes, Quakers. Any other groups that you can think of? All right, that's a good collection. Presbyterians, yes. The Dunkers. I think we have a section on the Dunkers. I can't remember exactly their history in Philadelphia, but the Dunkards, I think, might be the community. Let me get back to you on that, Chris. But thank you for bringing up an obscure group. Yes, a wide variety of Protestants. Puritans, no Puritans in Philadelphia. That was more of a New England, Massachusetts, a sect up in New England. Great. All right, so of the groups that were here, I just wanted to really make the case that William Penn oftentimes is overlooked as a founding father. I think that Philadelphia and this example of diversity it definitely made an impact on American culture. And of course, these founding commitments to make the Congress should make no law respecting and establish it mean there would be no establishing an official religion, and there would be the protection of the free exercise thereof. Penn's colony, I think, is not recognized enough as creating a culture that kind of moved this early nation to these commitments. So let's take a look at just a couple of quick vignettes from this period before we turn to our discussion. Anglicans. Christ Church, of course, was the church that was founded by Anglicans. Anglicanism was the official church of England. And in most of the colonies, when the Anglicans showed up, they expected to be the official church, the church that was in charge, the church that would get the tax benefits and all this kind of a thing. But this was not the case in William Penn's colony. They had to compete with other religious groups for donations and members. And they finally realized that they thought they could come with all of this privilege, but those privileges didn't count for much in this city that was run by folks from a wide variety of perspectives, and Quaker being a religious minority as well. Catholics in colonial Philadelphia. Catholics began to arrive in the early 18th century in Philadelphia. Old St. Joseph's is a church that is the oldest one, founded by Jesuits in 1733. Many of them had escaped the colony of Maryland. You may have heard of Maryland as the headquarters of the Catholic Church, but Maryland at some point decided to establish Anglicanism as the official church, and many Catholics said, well, we want to go somewhere else where we have more freedom to practice. And Pennsylvania was a convenient place for some of those Catholics to come. So in the 1730s, a lot of folks don't know this, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, was the only place where it was legal for Catholics to hold Mass in British North America. And even though they had legal protections, they still faced some discrimination from groups who mistrusted them, who felt that their allegiance was not to the king in London, but the Pope in Rome. And there are many stories of intolerance towards Catholics that I think can be relevant to religious intolerance in our world today. So who else? Jews, somebody mentioned. Mikveh Israel is the oldest continual living synagogue in the U.S., and Mikveh Israel has an important role in the Constitution. In 1787, during the Constitutional Convention, Jonas Phillips, pictured here, sent a letter to the convention and said, please, when you're drafting this Constitution, please do not require there to be a religious test for holding public office. During this time, if you wanted to run for Pennsylvania office, you had to sign an oath which says that the New Testament and the Old Testament of the Bible were the word of God. And of course, that meant for Jews, you would either have to lie or renounce your Jewish faith in order to run for office. So the Jews of Philadelphia petitioned the Constitutional Convention, and wouldn't you know it, they decided that there would be no religious test for holding public office. I believe it's Article 5. So today, people from any background, religious or even non-religious, can run for office without having to pass a religious test. So this is a gift given to our nation by a small synagogue right here in Philadelphia. Muslims, of course, arrived in our city as early as 1762, maybe earlier. We have a ship that arrived from the Senegambia region, a region that had a high population of Muslims. And if you want to ask more about Muslims, you can ask our in-house expert, Dr. Abdullah, who this is his area of research. Black Christianity. We often tell stories of Methodist Church, we have the oldest Methodist Episcopal Church in North America, but also one of the most famous members of that church is Richard Allen, who, as a African-American preacher, invited to preach at that church, even though he was able to win many converts to the Methodist faith. He experienced racism and discrimination in his church, and in one incident, he led a walkout and founded a new denomination, the historic African Methodist Episcopal Church, born right here in Philadelphia. There are many stories we could tell about the first residents. William Penn, of course, was viewed as often understood to be the friend of the Indians. Lenape people today, my Lenape friends, talk about William Penn as truly as a friend, given the situation that he was in. His descendants, his sons, and those that followed him were less so. And there are many stories of violence against Native people. There are also stories of swindling land out of our Lenape neighbors during that time period as well. And there are many stories we could tell about the Lenape people as well. Free thinkers. Not every resident of Philadelphia during the colonial period belonged to a Jewish faith or a specific Christian denomination. There were also folks who said, I believe things out of the norm. Elihu Palmer, most of you, I guarantee hardly any of you have heard of this figure, but I think he's important because he was somebody who believed that religious morality and virtue, that morality and virtue could be found through revelation of the natural world, through the scientific world, rather than simply in revealed biblical texts. And he was viewed as a threat by many in Philadelphia for these nonconforming beliefs. But nonetheless, it does give us an example of how, even though there was religious freedom, there were often limits. So Elihu Palmer's story, I think, is a helpful hook to talk about those who have non-traditional beliefs. We'll talk briefly about this. Can somebody identify the building pictured here in the chat? Does anybody recognize this building? I'd be very impressed if you did. This is the site of the oldest university in America. It's not Harvard. It's not Yale. It's not College of William Mary. Was called at this time the Academy of Philadelphia, or later the College of Philadelphia, and eventually became known as the University of Pennsylvania, an institution I'm sure you have heard of. But during this period, this institution was founded not just to train Protestant clergy like Harvard and Yale. It was founded as an institution to train in business skills, to train in Greek philosophy, to engage in a broad kind of humanities curriculum. And this could only happen in a city as diverse and inclusive as Philadelphia, where you had all of these conflicting ideas. This educational institution became a gathering point for folks from many backgrounds, that founded this secular or civic institution that could build bridges across religious difference. And Ben Franklin is perhaps the best figure that illustrates that ability in Philadelphia history. There are so many stories I could tell. I could tell about the conflicting ways that religious people either supported slavery or they opposed slavery. I could talk about the anti-Catholic riots of the 1840s, another example of the limits of toleration. But just to wrap it up, a couple of themes that emerge from the stories that I've shared with you and that we tell again and again is that religious diversity has always been present in America. It's not just diversity is not just a today thing. It's an always been the case thing. And Philadelphia is a story not just of religious freedom, but it also helps us to tell the story of where there were limits and how the rights of certain groups were circumscribed even in this tolerant city. Third, there's no one religious perspective on any issue. There were many different viewpoints. All Christians don't believe the same thing. All Jews don't believe the same thing. Fourth, historical figures. We move beyond the hero villain categories. William Penn, yes, he owned enslaved people. At the same time, he founded a colony that was far more welcoming than other colonies in terms of religious diversity. Religions can uplift and unite, but they can also harm and divide. Another aspect of the story that is interesting is that the toleration of diversity didn't, it actually led to more religious expression rather than squelch religious expression, which was a fear at the time. And then finally, it's possible to find a common ground across differences. Ben Franklin is a figure who built civic institutions that united people together for social betterment, for civic benefit as well. So that is enough to say, just to give us a taste of Philadelphia stories. And I hope that some of you can join us on Saturday for our walking tour through the city and hear a few more of those stories. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of a taste of what's out there. And we welcome to be in conversation. So without further ado, Dr. Abdullah, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Dave, for setting the stage so powerfully. Now let's turn to our panel of educators who have been helping students think critically and compassionately about what freedom, faith, and civic identity mean in today's classrooms. So I'll ask each panelist to give a brief introduction, and we'll start here with Dr. Hernandez Pena.
Good evening, all. I'm Doc H, as the kids call me here at the Lawrenceville School. I was trying to look at the image of Penn, and it was really reminiscent of the Pennsylvania Hospital down in Old City, right by 9th and Pine. I was like, that looks like the building that that the hospital is at. So, been in Philadelphia for a while. I did my graduate education at the University of Pennsylvania and at Temple University. Had a wonderful dissertation advisor, Dr. Zain Abdullah, and have really benefited both from my time in Philadelphia and also trying to continue my work looking at the intersections of race and Islam, specifically in 16th century Spain and sort of the very unique and also cosmopolitan era at the very beginnings of modernity in Spain. So that's kind of like my background. I teach religion and philosophy and history at the Lawrenceville School, which is an independent school right outside of Princeton. And glad to be here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So now we'll turn to Danielle St. Hilaire.
Hi, good evening. I'm so thankful to be here. I am a history teacher at Friend Central School here just right outside of Philadelphia. And I'm a lifelong student. I like to tell my own students that I stay curious. And I am a James Madison Fellow, which is a fellowship awarded to study the Constitution. In my studies of the Constitution, I've had some great teachers, but I'm always circling around thinking about Black women and the role of the Constitution in their lives. Black women in Philadelphia, some of the greats I think of, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth. I put them in dialogue with myself today and find wisdom in their stories and learnings. And I'm currently teaching, my scholarship is in sociology and history. So I currently teach sociology, US history, and a great class on Philadelphia Black history, which I'm excited to hear more about some of the work touring that you all are doing and get some more ideas from my own students.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, you have more to say, Daniel? No? Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, now we'll turn to Dr. Siobhan McMillan.
Good evening, everyone. Glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And so currently I'm the executive academic officer for Big Picture Philadelphia, which is a nonprofit that supports 2 high schools in Philadelphia. I began my career 20 years ago as an English teacher in the school district of Philadelphia. And that was before moving into leadership in Trenton, New Jersey. Throughout my journey, I focused on liberatory leadership and creating access for students, their communities, and families, with a focus on post-secondary outcomes that lead to economic freedom. And so currently with Big Picture Philadelphia, we focus on real-world learning and bringing the classroom, making the classroom part of the students' experiences and their experiences part of the classroom. You know, we always say that the classroom expands beyond the four walls, which is why they actually go into the community and create authentic projects, which I'll speak about hopefully a little bit later. And again, I'm happy to be here.
Okay, thank you so much. And now, last but not least, Nate Solomon.
Good evening, friends. Hi. Thank you to everybody for coming tonight. Thank you so much for the invite to be here. I'm super excited to learn from all the incredible panelists. I'm Nate Salamone. I am a proud civics teacher at Universal Auden Reed Charter High School. We are on the south side of Philadelphia. We are a career and tech ed public charter school. So we take everybody from the south side neighborhood that comes in. There's no lot or anything like that. And our scholars follow a career tech ed pass. So they can go and they can become auto mechanics when they're done with school. They can go into HRT or human resources technology, graphic design, or they can go to college and take that path as well. And that's where I come in. I teach sophomore civics, Constitution 101, and AP US Government and Politics. When I'm done with teaching at Auden Reed, I also work part-time at the Constitution Center. I'm a proud member of their teacher advisory board, where we get to kind of oversee all the resources the Constitution Center does. I'm on the summer planning committee for this year's Summer Institutes. Beyond that, I'm very proud to be part of the Justice Collaboration at Eastern State Penitentiary, trying to get out the Justice Ed curriculum and trying to just kind of educate more people about we're more than a scary haunted house in October, I promise. There's a lot more there. And also the Gilded Teacher League out of Spiegel Grove, Ohio. So bunch of stuff. Obviously, you can tell all the free time in the world. But super happy to be here tonight. Super happy to talk for a little bit and learn some awesome stuff.
Great, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And now we will go into our panel discussion. And I want to encourage everyone to please place your questions in the chat, because we will first hear from two panelists, and then we will have a short Q&A. And then we will continue with the other two panelists, and then we'll open it up for a great and rich discussion, right? So I want to start with Dr. H. And so, Dr. H, your work connects history, religion, and what you call the moral imagination, a capacity to see across difference. Let's start here. How can K through 12 educators help students think about the founding era in ways that connect civic ideals to empathy and moral responsibility today? If you want me to repeat the question, I'll do that as well.
No, thank you. So when I think about moral, like a morality stemming from our own connection to our citizenship and our participation in the government and sort of our participation in what we do here, the sort of experiment that begins in Philadelphia, I think about the sort of connections I try to make even within my own space here at the Lawrenceville School, and speaking to students about the type of community that we want to create, and the sort of responsibility that's inherent in community building. And what educators can do is the sort of look at their classrooms as a microcosm of the type of community they'd like to create, and use the founding as sort of a roadmap, a way of looking at how ideas can be shared, how civic responsibility is our ongoing inheritance as members of our own communities, and to look at what we do as a form of direct service, and kind of how do we connect our own classroom spaces to the larger school communities and also the communities that we belong to. So looking at the spaces and looking at what we do in education as a vehicle for us to tie back to what was happening at the very beginning, and the many different, like the multivocal conversations that were happening at the very beginning in the founding of our nation, and how it wasn't just to kind of eliminate the notion of whitewashing, or sort of eliminate the notion that it was just one particular way of doing things, and kind of bring that plurality into the spaces that we curate and create.
Okay, good. So let me follow up before we go to the next panelist. But so Philadelphia's diversity was extraordinary, even in the 1700s. How can teachers use that history to model pluralism?
I think the Philadelphia remains an interesting place in terms of diversity. And sort of the introduction that Dr. Krueger gave us was a very interesting one. This idea of mapping particular spaces, the idea of creating, using technology in order to access these things. When we think about pluralism in our classrooms, especially here at the Lawrenceville School, we deploy a form of teaching that is the Harkness method, which is basically what we would call graduate seminar. We would have to read the text and come to class and be prepared. It's those sorts of conversations where everyone in the room is able to bring what they understood, what they captured, what they're able to provide. And those multivocal conversations can mirror the same sorts of plural conversations that were happening at the very founding of the nation. Looking at religious diversity is like fundamental to what was happening in America, right? And that the experiment of America begins in a space that's pluralistic, not just in sort of belief, but also in what people were bringing to the table, in the sorts of people that came, and even during the Constitutional Convention, where you had representatives from all over the 13 colonies, or what was the sort of the beginnings of the U.S. And sort of where Philadelphia sits and Pennsylvania sits in terms in relation to the rest of the U.S. All of this kind of like looking at geographies and looking at how spaces are connected, but also then connecting these notions of a plurality that becomes one, right? Out of many, one. Sort of the slogan of the nation that we find even on our like dollar bills. And that can be a very powerful tool in order for us to make the past become something that we can bring into the present, where we are currently in a state of our nation where pluralism seems to be, and diversity and the ideas of belonging are not what people are focusing on in many places. Luckily, some of us might inhabit spaces that are still retaining those values. And by looking at the past and the whatever pluralism existed then, and to kind of really debunk the myth that there was just one thing or one people creating this nation, but it was many people and many things creating this particular nation that we belong to.
All right, thank you so much. This is a beautiful reminder that civic education is ultimately moral education. We appreciate that. So next, Danielle, your work as a historian and James Madison Fellow explores the Constitution through the eyes of those often left out of that story, particularly Black women. That perspective feels essential for 2026. What stories from Black women during the founding era most resonate with your students?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm excited to tell you about a lesson I did just this week as we are moving towards studying the Constitution. I'm curious if folks can use the reaction button to let me know who's heard of George Whitefield. George Whitefield. Does that sound familiar? If you can give a reaction, yes or no. Okay.
Oh, got some reaction.
Oh, yeah. All right, awesome. Yeah, great. And so we have this sort of narrative of the founding. I learned it as the Constitution having sort of three intellectual headwaters: Enlightenment liberalism, Protestantism, and classical republicanism. And so I teach my students about this, and they've never heard of George Whitefield. And so he was here, and the founders were sort of coming of age during the Great Awakening So they were, steeped in this this Protestant evangelism. And Benjamin Franklin, went down to Market Street to see Whitfield speak, and the scientist that he was, he took measurements to calculate how many folks could have heard his, booming voice. And I think it was like 30,000 folks he calculated could hear this booming voice. And I'm like a teacher that shouts a little bit in the classroom. So the students get a kick out of me and my teacher voice and understanding what that would be like to preach. But we really access him through and understand this approach through the writing of Phillis Wheatley, who wrote an elegy for George Whitfield. And originally, folks had thought that this was her first sort of poem. Hey, now can I get some reactions for Phillis Wheatley? Who knows Phillis Wheatley from Boston? Yeah. And I think like often during like Black History Month, people will explore Phillis Wheatley, but not ever really in connection with the founding, and in connection with the sort of her exploration of her own religiosity. She's so fascinating because how we approach her story has changed over time. So thinking about change over time with students through her, but we read her elegy, and it's so floral, and she speaks about, I have a few lines here, that Wheatley inflamed the soul and captivated the mind, and she speaks in such delightful words about him. So students begin to understand her view of him, of Whitfield, and then they begin to question, could she really sort of write this way from her positionality as an enslaved Black woman? Was she being authentic in this? Was she sort of telling the truth? And I think scholars over time have asked this question, so it's a great place to have students explore these ideas. And after they look at this poem, I do follow it up with a second one of Wheatley's poems on coming from Africa to America. And this was one of her shortest poems. And it is the one in which she writes that it was mercy that brought her from her pagan land. And she sort of celebrates the idea that, or we question, is she celebrating the idea that it was merciful, that these Christian enslavers were actually sort of showing a kindness by ripping her away from her father? She arrived here when she was 7 years old in a scrap of carpet, they say. And then I have the students read that poem sort of in a new way, and dripping with sarcasm, so that the first read, they read it straightforward and, oh, it was mercy that brought me here. But when we add that sort of tone and voice, a new tone and new voice, and you read it in a new way, you can see first how hard it is to understand primary sources from the 1740s, like 50s and 60s, that we can't really access from our present position. Can be so hard to interpret those sources. But then also to see a Black woman questioning and seeming to play around with and question the oppressor in such a way that, like, they just playing a trick on them, right? They celebrate her, but she's really throwing a lot of shade. And I love to use this story for, it teaches so many skills to the students, and they came away with it sort of minds blown at the end, like, wow, I can use poetry for activism. I can resist oppression with my voice. And also because when Phillis wrote this first poem, she was 17 years old, and they're 16, 17. They really do see themselves in her story.
Good.
So thank you
Great.
so much for that question.
Well, thank you. So I do have a follow-up.
Yes.
Which is, so you emphasize cultivating curiosity through primary sources. Which
Mhm.
early American documents or voices best help students see beyond the founding fathers?
Yeah. So the other one that Professor Krueger mentioned was Richard Allen, and that's what I was going to point to, thinking about the epidemic, and Richard Allen and Absalom Jones as sort of a center for faith as activism since the founding. So people using religion as a center for activism and a center for um, pursuing their rights, and making themselves and their community free. Um, so Richard Allen, his prayer partner, Jones, founded the Free African Society. Looking at those minutes or the founding document can be instructive. Um, and thinking about mutual aid. So I do, in my Philadelphia Black History course, we're actually going on a field trip to Mother Bethel on Monday. Um, and I think like the best primary sources, I love the idea of mapping and location-based work. I think if you can get students out to feel and experience space, that's really impactful as well. So.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So Dave and Sage, let's turn to some of the chats, the questions in the chat. Do we have some questions there?
I don't see any questions yet, but we invite attendees if you'd like to pose a question or make a comment or express a curiosity. We invite you to do so.
Yeah. And Dave, would you like to interject?
No, I'm soaking it in. I love I love the stories, particularly about Ona Judge is a story we often tell about because when we go to the president's house, there's the George Washington story, of course, but Ona Judge's story is intertwined with that, and the kind of the early predecessor to the Underground Railroad really kind of has some origins in that story of Ona Judge escaping from the Washington household, likely members of Mother Bethel Church, probably Sarah Allen, Richard Allen's spouse, may have been involved in helping this woman escape the city. So there's so many amazing stories of Black women in this city. So thank you for sharing those connections. It was great.
Right. So I think what we can do, I would love to hear Danielle and Yarrick in a conversation about what you presented. Is anything that you want to interject? Any comments that you might have, just to kind of start some dialogue, exchange of ideas here.
Well, I really appreciated the like tying it back to the primary sources. I know that like finding those primary sources and kind of bringing them to the classroom. What are some of the like a question I would have? What are some of um, the accessibility questions regarding those primary sources, like in terms of language, what was being used, terminology the students might not know. So what are some of the preparatory things you do to kind of like
Mhm.
make sure that when they hit those texts, they know exactly how to access them?
Yeah. The lack of sources, I think, is so important. Even the Ona Judge, the stories we have about Ona Judge, there's a lot of, yeah, I'm going to lean on a media studies kind of framing, but critical fabulation, right? Where we're supposing that Ona Judge walked in this street and we're sort of putting on in our imagination. So I love your work, the moral imagination, but imagining the lives and filling in those gaps because we don't really have all of the details. So we have to do a lot of this imaginatory work, this creative work to connect the dots.
Mhm.
again, I like staying curious. I love just cultivating questions, and then kind of thinking through what what it could have been like. I think is fun, and an accessible way for students to really start thinking about the gaps in the archives.
Okay, good. So do you have anything for Yarick? Do you have any?
Yeah, I do. I do.
Okay,
I was loving
share,
the,
share.
the thinking about community of something that I really spent a lot of time thinking about in my classroom. And I could say a lot about sort of civil discourse, or civil disagreement, and how we need to disagree better. And I have some tricks that I use in my classroom, but I was wondering for you, what are some concrete things, Dr. H, that you do in your classroom that help build community?
I think one of the like fundamental things I do is since we're sitting at a Harkness table, which is an oval table, my classrooms are fairly small, and I sort of situate myself socially for the students. I'm like, you guys see all the diplomas on the wall. I'm much older than you. I'm cis. I'm het. Like all of these things that kind of like position me socially within the classroom and say, okay, these are all of the ways in which. I'm privileged in a particular situation or that I'm given my voice isn't given primacy. And I want to dispel those things. I want to challenge us to say, whether we're tackling a particular text or a thinker, whether it's like a secondary source or whether it's like even tertiary encyclopedic source, when I tell them it's like we must question all. And it's a lesson that I learned so much later in my academic career than high school, right? So it's like I remember first questioning as like, middle of my undergraduate career saying, oh, this dude doesn't really usually it was a dude. I was reading a history text and I was like, this dude, I don't know what this dude's saying, right? I don't really agree. And that position of being able to challenge that is fundamental. And so some of the things I do is one of the things I did when I taught at Central in Philly was that when I would teach Abraham Lincoln, I would lie to my students. I would lie. I would just flat. I was all these like just when you're talking about like creating a fable, right? Creating a fiction in the arc, like literally just tell them fictions until one of them called me out, until one of them challenged me and said, no, 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 this is Doc. This is at the time I was Mr. Hernandez, and they were like, no, 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 you like this is untrue. And then I would stop and then have a conversation, the real conversation, the real lesson, which was, you must question everything. You must question me. You must question the text. You must question your classmates, the other educators here. It all must be questioned. None of it is just fact. None of it's all being constructed, right? It's all being made up, right? And so I think that like that is definitely something that I tell them. I mean, I try to position myself, but also to say like I'm just older than y'all and I have more school, but like y'all are hella more intelligent than I ever was at your age. And I think that by pointing out the fact that we can share things intelligently and kind of push back on what's being presented, it really evens the playing field. And of course, like I'm there to correct and facilitate, but that's how I see myself, not necessarily as this owner of information, but as this person who can facilitate their education and I think about my training as a scholar of Spanish too, which is like, when I think of facilitate, I think of facil and making ease, right? To providing ease. And within my own religious tradition as a Muslim and stuff, like it's often that we pray for ease, not necessarily that the trial or the tribulation goes away, but that Allah makes it easy for us, right? So that we can make it from one place to another, and traverse the tribulation successfully. And so the classroom is troublesome, it's tricky. And I think that like for a lot of kids, especially kids of color within my particular institution, which is a predominantly white institution, um, I try to let them know like this, you have to be able to, if you do this in my class, you should be doing it in all the classes too. Like, learn it here, learn this particular skill and push back gently if you need to and kind of learn how to like do that for certain educators, but question it all. And maybe I'll play the X-Files theme for them or something, but you know, whatever it is, but make sure that they are willing to ask those hard questions.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So we do have from Lake Sander, we have a question here. Before we go there though, I'm curious. How do you all see the type of institution in which you teach, and how do you think that's making a difference in how you reach your students, right? And as Dr. H said, in terms of a position of privilege, do they see you as privileged, and how do they relate to you, like say in a public school as opposed to a friend's school, right? A charter school of Nate, right? And so with Yarrick, Dr. H, his school has an endowment of $1 billion, right? So that's mind-boggling, and students coming from that kind of privilege, right? And so I mean, we're going to come to Nate and Dr. McMillan, but I want you all to weigh in just for a moment about the kinds of institutions that you have come out of, either as educators or administrators, and how does that make a difference for the way you teach, for how students learn?
So, I mean, when I first started, I mean, I started my educational career in Philadelphia, my teaching career in Philly. I worked at Northwood Academy, up in like the very beginnings of the Northeast. And that was like my first year in the K through 7 at the time. Went to Penn, got my master's, and then went to work in LA. Worked for LA Unified for a year.
Which was a public school, right?
All public schools at this particular point. I mean, the Northwood was a charter school. After that, I worked for the School District of Philadelphia at Simon Gratz. I worked at Gratz, and then Gratz became a charter school. And at that point, we were given the sort of choice whether to stay or to leave. I chose to go back to school. That's where I started my graduate program, the PhD program at Temple. And when I was done with Temple, I went back to public school. I was out in the Bay Area. I taught in East Oakland, California. Um, and from there taught at Fremont. And so throughout my career, I sort of began my career in educational institutions, public educational institutions of low means, and working like Simon Gratz, working in Northwood, working in Sun Valley Middle School in the San Fernando Valley. We actually were at the same place where Richie Valens went to school, where they shot that scene when the plane comes down. That was where I worked. And the sort of community there, the immigrant communities that I worked with, that I have worked with, the Black and Brown communities, where solidarity is important. And I think it was really important when I got my PhD to go back and work in those schools, so the kids can meet, Dr. Hernandez, and they would call me Doc H back then too. And so I think that it was important for them to see where they could go. And within my institution now, it's important for them to see me in a different light. They might not ever encounter another Dr. Hernandez. I mean, luckily there's some other educators, even within my department. Dr. Naboa, who's actually part of our crew right here. She's also a Dominican American educator. So like, it's good for them to see folks like us because, and I always think about where my students might go, the boardrooms they might enter, both the kids that I had before and now the kids that are in positions of privilege that their route to the boardroom is probably a little shorter. And just being present, right? So like access, and actually for the kids back in East Oakland, for them to see me as like aspirational, and then now for the kids at Lawrenceville to see me as also, as Pierre Bourdieu liked to say, the professorial class as the working class of the upper class, right? So just let them know. I'm always telling them how broke I am, even though even though they might be being picked up, or they might be driving cars that cost about the size, cost about a house. I'm like, I'm broke, but I'm with you. We go to the same, $30 million pool, but we're broke. I'm broke, so
Okay.
I make sure that sort of positionality, that sort of critique of capital is also important.
Yeah. So Nate and Dr. McMillan have been so patient. We really appreciate your patience here. Dr. McMillan, can you weigh in on that? I know you have multiple sort of levels and roles of being an educator in Philadelphia.
Yes. So I actually started my career at Simon Gratz High School. And like I said earlier, I moved on to Trenton, New Jersey, then came back and worked in the charter world. I was a principal for 10 years. And now I'm a leader for a nonprofit that supports two public schools. And I think positionality is key. You know, I had to learn early on, you know, although I look like my students, we're different. You know, the minute that I step foot into a classroom, I have this position of power, you know, and you know, I am not just the teacher, I'm a learner, you know, in that space as well, you know. And my students come to me with their own set of values and their own cultural capital. And what can I do to build upon that, right? Oftentimes in schools and in classrooms, we inadvertently we tear that down, you know, as opposed to build it up. And so one of the things that I pride myself on in my role at Big Picture Philadelphia is creating safe spaces for students and building on that capital, right? You know, what's important to you? You know, what do you want to learn more about? You, you know, what do you want to challenge? You know, I think it's interesting that sometimes students don't think that they have a right to challenge. You know, they don't have a right to have a dissenting view. No, you have a right. You know, you belong here. And we may be the experts in our content area, but we're not the experts in your life and what you bring into this space. And so it's just really critical that we understand our position and our power, relate to our students, and not tear down, but build upon what they bring into a space.
Thank you so much. Nate, you want to offer
Yeah.
any feedback?
First of all, this was not patience. This was incredible. I'm loving everything everyone's saying, and I feel really blessed to be in this call. I think one of the few things that I can offer to this is being at a public charter. We have a lot of power to control the curriculum that we teach. So, literally, my first year at my school, my principal said, "Welcome aboard. You have to plan a year of civics and government." And I had come from a position where I did not teach civics and government. I took, a few college credits and stuff. And so it was a lot of humbling. It was a lot of learning. It was a lot of reading. And with that power of construction, I also think there's a big responsibility to incorporate subjects and topics that maybe would not typically be taught in a civics classroom and try to incorporate as many hidden histories and stories that are not brought to the limelight as possible. And I'm still on that search. I've been typing notes along the way of all the great people everyone's talking about to add to that curriculum, which I'm really excited about. But it's also to empower our students. One of my favorite lessons I do every year, a real original title, it's called the lesson plan lesson. I show students how I do a lesson plan, and I give them all the tools I have, and I say, okay, write a rough draft. And I will teach 5 of them every year. And so some years I've taught about like climate and local areas. Sometimes I've taught about like certain topics in the community. I'm very humble to say I was not born in Philly, but I moved to Philly. I didn't know about the move bombing until I came to the city, and until a student's like, you need to look this up. And I'm like, what happened on an apart? Like, that was crazy. And so that has been a lesson I've taught and I've recycled. So I think Dr. McMillan just said this, but I'm learning a lot too from my kids, and I tell them that every day. I had a friend once who taught social studies in the morning and math in the afternoon. We don't have the answers for social studies, but the math was good. They had answers for that. So just constantly learning, constantly trying to grow. The final thing too is, and I think it was Danielle, you brought this up, power of place, power of going somewhere and visiting. And, my students have lived and grown, and most of them are in Philly their whole lives. Sometimes they will have never gone to Old City, or they won't have gone to sites outside of Philadelphia. So I am the field trip guy. I did 15 field trips last year, all around Philly, DC, New York, and my principal this year is like, you're doing 20, right? So we're trying, but just to get them out, to get them to experience. And social studies is so cool because you can make it what you want. You can bridge the gap between any period in time and show students that they have the power to make the world anew. And so that's what constantly keeps me going back. And I hope I answered your question. I'm still dazzled by all the other awesome answers.
No, it was lovely. Thank you so much. And so Danielle, transitioning from a lot of your comments, I'll say that it's such a thoughtful reminder to hear your comments, because it is about sort of the inclusion itself is a civic skill, right? And that curiosity is a gateway to understanding, right? So do you want to weigh in to, because I know the Friends School is a different kind of place, right? And if you
Yeah.
could talk about that uniqueness before, then I'll go on to Dr. McMillan for her presentation.
Absolutely. So I'm so happy to teach in a Quaker school and be a Quaker educator. We rely on the testimonies, or the spices, as the students know them by: simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equity, um, and I'm going to forget the last one off the top of my mind. But really, this gives me freedom to teach all things in the context of these testimonies. The one that really is coming up for me a lot is the equality testimony. And my work in the past couple of years, I've been doing a lot of work with my colleagues who are wonderful in our history department with active listening. We began last year to teach active listening as an antidote to political polarization. And we've kind of pursued this idea of active listening. The key ingredient, though, and that I think that the Quaker school allows us to use, is seeing that of God in everyone, and allowing all voices to emerge with respect and care. Civil discourse is not about being polite. It's about seeing the humanity in everybody. And that's something that I think is unique to a Quaker education. And I'm so thankful that I get to just rely on that every day. I know in your first call, a lot of teachers were concerned about parent pushback and a resistance to teaching about religion and other topics. And in the way that I can rely on the sort of backbone in my curriculum, it's so helpful.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much. So before we go to the next presenter on the panelist, so Lysander Pukio, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but so her comment is, or their comment is, I'm also looking for ideas about how to build community with second and third graders. Does anyone want to weigh in on that? How do you think about that process, especially in terms of religion? How do you teach religion, religious studies, religious thinking to second and third graders?
So I don't have much experience with the babies except for my own biological babies. My experience started with grade 5 to 12. But something that we do at all big picture schools is we hold advisory every single day. Advisory is a credit bearing course for us, but it's also home base. And in advisory, we hold circle every single day. We circle up every single day. We have journal every single day. And sometimes the prompts are in response to something going on in the world or in the local community. Sometimes they're just prompts, and sometimes Circle requires the students to compliment one another, challenge one another. And I'm sharing that because I can't think of a reason why that can't be done with babies, with the second and third graders.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And while I have you here, let's begin. Okay. So, Dr. McMillan, your leadership journey from classroom teacher to network leader focuses on equity representation and education as liberation. Let's talk about what that means in practice. Right? How can the semi-quincentennial become an opportunity for students to rethink what freedom and equality mean today?
Sure. So at big picture schools, primarily a big picture Philadelphia, Vaux and El Centro, we view education as the ultimate act of liberation and the road to financial freedom, which I mentioned before. And so the Semiquincentennial offers an opportunity for advisors. We call all of our teachers advisors. It's an opportunity for them to invite students to critically examine exactly what freedom and equality have meant over time. And quite frankly, who's been left out of that promise, right? And so our work is rooted in helping students to see themselves as the co-authors of their own stories, in their own communities. We do have authentic assessments. We hold exhibitions twice a year. And so these are not standardized tests. These are opportunities for students to set their own criteria. They create individualized learning plans and they go before their communities, their advisories, and their mentors. And they talk about their learning journeys. I found, I mentioned this earlier, that many students, they don't often feel like they've earned the right to speak, and as if their truth needs to be validated by somebody, right? But at big picture, we push back on that. This is your story, and it's a requirement to tell your story, in the way that you want to tell it. Like, yes, we have criteria for success, but they get to contribute to that. What is successful to them? We standardize everything, and there's a place for that. That's necessary, right? But we need to give agency to students as well. We create spaces where they don't just share their stories, they actually own their stories. And like I mentioned, through these authentic projects, we have something called learning through internship and learning through interest. We call it LTI. They go out into the community. So my colleague mentioned taking them out on trips, right? We have leave to learns. Students leave campus twice a week. It is a requirement. In their ninth grade year, they have interest arcs where they get to explore different career opportunities and different passions. So many students come to us and they don't really know what they're passionate about yet. But the idea is that by the time they're in the 10th grade, they have a little bit of an idea. And so they can stick with that idea and go to that cohort twice a week. By the time they're upperclassmen, they may have it's called an internship, but I like to think of it as a mentorship because it's not just, going to get coffee for someone. They're really learning why the person that they're interning with, why they're passionate about the work, right? And then they have an opportunity to create an LTI project is what we call it. They create that project alongside their advisor and their mentor. And so just to bring it back to, how they continue to own their work and their story, advisors can ask, what does freedom look like in my community? What does it look like as I'm working through this LTI project? And what power do I have in this situation? And so I also just want to add that the Semiquincentennial presents, I just love that I can say that word. That's why I keep saying it. I was struggling with it earlier. So the Semiquincentennial, it presents just an opportunity to challenge religious and social doctrine that historically marginalized and Black and Brown students and Indigenous people have not historically challenged. Through these authentic assessments and this real world learning experience, students have an opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you so much. So in this follow-up, so you have covered a lot of what I'm going to ask you, but I'm wondering if you could speak more directly to religion. So my question is, what does authentic community-driven teaching look like when we bring religion and identity into the classroom?
And so we don't hold spaces where I'm being very transparent, where religion is the primary focus, right? But what is the primary focus is culture and students being able to learn more about, whatever they wish, right? And so we create safe spaces, and this is through not just our real world learning program, but also through what we call resiliency. And so what, advisors can do and what they have done is just bring these experiences and different texts to students to further discuss, but we're not a religious school. I just, I wanted to just, clarify that we're not a nonprofit with that focus. But we're not going to be told what we can't do, right? We're going to do what's best for students. And also help students to challenge, like I mentioned earlier, different doctrine and different things that they've been taught. challenge it, think critically about it. So I would like to think that we host spaces for that. And also advisors have autonomy to create their own units. We do not have to follow a district curriculum. We do use it sometimes to guide us, but there's a lot of autonomy in the units that advisors create. And we do solicit the feedback from students to help create these units. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, that was wonderful. Very powerful. One word, powerful. You remind us that freedom is something we teach into being. And that's very much appreciated. So we'll go to our next panelist, our last but not least panelist, Nate. Did you pronounce your name Salamani?
Very close. Salamoni.
Salamoni. Okay.
Italian.
It's Italian. I was going to say it's Italian. Okay, good. All right. Well, Nate, you've helped teachers nationwide engage with the Constitution. How can constitutional case studies help students see how religious freedom has evolved since the 1776?
How much time do we have? No, in all seriousness, first
Not
of all,
a lot.
no, fair. I mean, everyone was spectacular. So
Yeah.
I think it always comes down to looking at the document, looking at what the Constitution says, and trying to look at and understand, and analyze what that meaning is in the past and what it has evolved to become. And I mean, I think one of the best ways to do that is looking at cases. There's a plethora of cases you could look at that discuss religion, whether it comes to, hey, what can I put in front of my city hall and what is allowed and what is not? Hey, am I allowed to say a prayer in a football field in the middle of the stands or not? Like what all these cases, some of them are older, like in the 60s, but a lot of them are recent, even from a few years ago. Kennedy versus Bremerton is the one I was talking about with the football coach. But also just in general, I know there's a lot of teachers here in the chat and whatever, just some of the resources available online. A lot of this work's done for you. The Constitution Center has an interactive constitution where you can go and look up all of the different amendments. And for our sake, the First Amendment, you can look on it, click on it, and not only does it say, what the First Amendment means, there are different speakers who have written essays about the Establishment Clause, about the Free Exercise Clause, and they write one together, which is, hey, this is what we both agree on. And then they both write separate ones that are like, this is what we don't see eye to eye on. And if you're talking about having civil discourse, it's an excellent way to kind of start a conversation. Maybe that doesn't work for everyone. Maybe, we talked about younger grades in the chat. The Constitution Center also has Constitution 101. It is their curriculum, which is available, does not cost a dime. It's free and accessible. And they have high school units all about, again, First Amendment religion clauses. There's lessons there, including the Kennedy versus Bremerton case. And they just recently released their middle school curriculum, too. If you want to have more of an incredible conversation like this has been tonight, and you would like to get a judge to come in and talk about cases, they offer something called scholar exchanges, where you can say, hey, I would love to have a person come and talk to my class about the First Amendment, about this, and they will have them Zoom into your room for 45 minutes and discuss anything you want. That goes for the First Amendment, that goes for topics that rotate. One other organization I'll shout out to, and I've used their resources, they're fantastic, is Street Law. Street Law has, again, so many resources about Supreme Court cases, and they are at a middle and high school level. And I love the way they do it. If you're a fan of moot courts, having students do the cases, and they have to be the prosecutors, defense attorneys, they have all that already done, ready, and locked and loaded. If you're in a situation where you kind of just want to go over facts of the case, they have the same case, but they'll have arguments for both sides. And you can have your students sort the arguments and try to understand what they mean before you dive into the case and really explore it in more detail. But I always find the best way to kind of attack the cases and understand them and illuminate whether it's religious freedoms or any other is having students either do some kind of a moot court, and also maybe maybe a little less rigorous skits. I like to have my students do an activity called a bio bag, where, because one of the classes I teach is AP Gov, I give them a case and then they have to use 3 props and act out the case. And they can either do the original case as it happened and then explain it, or they can do a modern scenario that might call into question some of the events of the case. And that allows them to see how these ideas are still around. They haven't gone away, and they're still a factor that impact us even in 2025 and beyond.
Great. So you gave us a lot to think about, many resources as well. Thank you so much for that. So let me ask you then, so what are your favorite ways to challenge the notion of the founding as static to help students see democracy as ongoing work?
Well, my favorite thing before I even touch the Constitution is I have them do it. I have them try to make rules and I have them try to make a government. And I do something called the shipwreck scenario, where there's a whole scenario where, oh no, you're on a cruise ship and it's crashed and cell phones don't work. It's for the skip. And you cannot leave that island for a year. How do you make a government that's going to keep 300 people alive for 1 year until you can be rescued? And student learns very quickly. They might have ideas, but it's not the same as their partners and it's not the same as a whole class. And well, how do you find an answer and how do you get what you want? And usually it doesn't happen. There's compromise. So it's just fun to have students act out the process. And then when we get to the Constitutional Convention, it's not like, why aren't they getting along? It's like, oh yeah, I understand why there's all these arguments. I understand why there's these discussions. And kind of like before with moot courts, we act it out. We debate it. We have conversations. I'll assign them Federalists, anti-Federalists, and we just have big conversations and big debates about it. And it's really fun to see how they will kind of bring in the curriculum from whatever class. I don't just do this as my AP. I do this with all my 10th graders. We do it at some point throughout the year, and then I bring it back. I don't know if there's AP teachers in the chat, but with the foundational documents. So they have to read Federalist 10. They must read Federalist 51, and then they incorporate that into their arguments. It's also like a nice first debate just to kind of see how the process works as well. So just let them live it. Let them try it for themselves and see how difficult it is to get consensus.
Hmm. So I'm curious, what has been for you a kind of sticky wicket, as it were, the kind of challenge around religion in the classroom? So I know you're talking a lot about government, how you think about government, which is great because religion is at the center of that. But what kind of slippery slope have you found around notions of religion in that whole scenario?
I think, there's a concept in psychology I'm completely blanking on right now where you think you know everything until you realize maybe you don't know everything. So if I said, who knows how to use a sink? And then people would raise their hand. I'm like, great, how do you build one? And they're like, I have no idea. And sometimes I think students like will either think they know something or have misconceptions. And it's kind of my job to kind of like question them. Not to necessarily say, no, you're wrong. That's not my job. It's to say, have you thought about this? Did you know about this? And just to have that open conversation and to start expanding the ideas that, oh, I never thought about that. And just having students question and learn through much so that experience of, I don't know everything, we don't know everything, but being open and humble to different ideas, maybe ideas they've never heard about as well.
Okay, great. No, thank you so much. So we have about 8 minutes left. So we're gonna in here, but we're gonna see, Dave, are there any questions in the chat for us?
I'm not seeing any questions as of yet, but we do encourage and invite you to share your thoughts. You can even unmute yourself and speak up if you'd like.
Right. And I would like to also acknowledge that we have Dr. Tim Hall here with us, who gave a wonderful presentation in our first webinar in the series. And so, Tim, welcome. Thank you so much. Okay. All right. So I wonder if I would like to just maybe open up the panel then a little bit and have you all sort of ask questions about your panelists' comments and what they've said. Is there anything there that you want to either expound upon or question, or just any kind of comment that you want us to think about? Nate, go ahead.
I'd love to ask. This is open for everybody in the panel or anybody else too in the chat. If you have ideas, please throw it in there. What is like a lesson that everyone should learn in a social studies classroom? What is like something, whether it's a skill, whether it's like everyone needs to know about James Fortin, like a person, whatever, an event? I would just love to know. And seriously, people in the chat, please throw ideas. We're all learning.
I'm gonna start and say it's something I think you mentioned earlier, the move bombing, right? That's something else that I knew nothing about. I am not from Philadelphia, and I didn't learn about it until maybe my second or third year teaching. And I'm like, wow, why weren't we taught about this, right? You know, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, like who's left out of the story, right? And why, you know? And so I definitely think that that is a lesson. There's so many lessons in that, right? So many lessons to be taught. So I think it's a non-negotiable that every child should know about the move bombing and the position of the government, the city, policy versus practice, right? What was actually policy, you know? Empathy, right? There's so many lessons that come from that.
And what do you think the role religion played in the entire thing? Because definitely a kind of religiosity, right? Religious identity was there in a very prominent way. What do you all think about that? Yeah, Yar?
So I had the pleasure of spending time with Ramona Africa at Berkeley. She spoke about the experience. One of the things that really struck me, not only like the vegetarianism and kind of like the sort of their relationship to the animals that they had under their care, um, just it, it it was interesting, the relationship that and the primacy of place that was given to life, right? And sort of like the equality that was there, not necessarily just like on a human level, but just like we are here to protect all life. And it's really interesting that, I mean, it was horrible that the bombing occurred, but it was like the sort of framing of the group as just like this militant group um, was very, very different than the experience I had with one of the members who was there on the day when the bombing occurred. And the humility and sort of like having an elder like that in a space where we're talking about um, what it means to have liberatory movements and emancipatory movements in today's world. um, it's just really powerful. And it just really stayed with me, because one of the critiques that the people in the community had was their relationship to the animals and all this other stuff. But how she explained it, like their stance against zoos, the stance, it was an entire framework that was very, very powerful.
Mhm. Yeah. Tim, did you have? I thought you wanted to weigh in a little bit. I don't know.
So I don't know. So I came in late, so I did not get the background. So I'm trying to do some quick searching to find out what the background was in like 140 characters or less. So that sounds very interesting. So if somebody gave me some background, I'd be interested to hear about.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that there's a new I'm forgetting the title and the author actually. I know Dave and I when you Dave you and I were looking at resources. There was a new book that came out. This was I guess it was last year about the move bombing, and there was this whole uh, kind of new evidence coming out. I think it was right. And Ramona's son too now, who has his own story about sort of what happened and that sort of thing too. So, Dave, did you want to chime in?
I'm looking up his name. I'll get it for you in 2 seconds if I can.
Okay.
Mike Africa Jr. I read the book earlier this year. It's
Oh, you
fantastic.
did? Nice. Okay.
I put it in the chat too.
Oh, great. Okay.
There's also Richard Kent Evans. Is that who that's who you're thinking about, right? Zane?
I don't recall. I don't recall. Yeah, but I know it came out. I guess it was 2024. Is that right, Nate? 2024.
Ooh, it was either 24 20. It was recent, like last year, last around that time.
Yeah. So it's a good source.
Well, I hear you talking about depictions of people, and I'm thinking of propaganda and, helping. I think essential ingredient of a good history and social sciences education is to understand propaganda. W.E.B. Du Bois, in his last chapter of Philadelphia Reconstruction, Black Reconstruction in America, has a whole piece on the propaganda used sort of to describe why Black people are struggling post-Civil War. And it's just really instructive to have students look at their history textbooks and see how, let's analyze this, let's compare different textbooks. And as it moves into let's interpret and analyze the media that I'm consuming and really understand framing and propagandizing, and how it's influencing the decisions I end up making in the world. I think those are real life skills that are essential for a history and social sciences classroom.
Mm.
And I'll just piggyback on it now that I see, I do. So this happened when I was very young. And so it's like a blip on my radar at the time. But it kind of reminds me of, and so in North Carolina, where I'm at, we have the 1898 Wilmington coup. And from when I grew up, I never learned about that. It was never in our history books. And what happened was in the town of Wilmington in 1898, a Black majority won the elections of that town, and a white supremacist group decided that that was enough, and they went in and ran everybody out of town violently.
Yeah.
And but I never saw that. I never learned that. So that kind of reminds me of this as well. Just listening to Dr. McMillan's comments.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting about that, I actually know about that because there was an excellent YouTube video on it that covered, I think it was produced by PBS, but they covered about maybe half an hour of the story. And it's like, wow, just what we don't know about our own history is a part of, I think, the way in which we're easily duped and easily sort of brought into sort of compromising positions, right? But so it's 8:31, and I'll end here by first thanking our panelists, right? Yeah, Yarek and Danielle and Siobhan and Nate, and thank you all so much. Of course, we have Sage working behind the scenes, doing what she does, and Dave, our executive director, and we want to thank everyone for this wonderful conversation. We just have so much more to talk about, and so we just can't end here. But thank you all for joining this conversation. And as we approach America's 250th anniversary, many of our classrooms continue to be spaces where curiosity, compassion, and critical thinking deepen our understanding of what freedom truly means. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you for being part of this national conversation.
Thank you so much. And we hope to have future events. And we're really grateful to the Funders Collaborative for the Semiquincentennial for making this event possible. So we hope to stay in touch with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.